The storm rolled down from the northern range faster than the forecast had warned. Cale Roran had seen dozens like it during his years on this edge of the frontier, but this one felt different, meaner, colder, louder. He finished stacking firewood by the cabin wall, locked the last of the tool crates, and stepped inside just as the first flakes turned to teeth. By dusk, wind howled through the trees like some old god waking from a long sleep. The windows shook. The lanterns flickered. And Cale sat by the stove, silent as always, sharpening a blade that no longer needed sharpening, just something to do with his hands. That's when the knock came. A single knock. Then silence. He froze. No one came out here. Not uninvited. Not in this weather. He crossed the floor, gripped the latch, and cracked the door just wide enough to see what waited outside. Two figures. Barely upright. Cloaked in torn, ice-crusted cloth. One leaned on the other. Their skin was pale, no, not pale. Luminous. Blue-green and glowing faintly beneath frost and mud. Eyes too large for human. Hands too slender. Cale blinked. You lost. The taller one swayed. Please, she said, voice thin. We can't stay outside. He hesitated for a breath. Then pulled the door wide and stepped aside. They collapsed just inside the threshold. Cale moved fast. The fire roared. Blankets layered. Water boiled. He stripped their soaked wrappings, careful not to touch bare skin longer than necessary. The taller one, older, maybe, had a shoulder wound, half-frozen and leaking silver-tinted blood. The smaller had bruises like handprints along her arms and ribs. Both were trembling hard. Cale wrapped them in dry thermal throws, set hot bricks at their feet, and kept the room quiet. No questions yet. Just heat and breathing. Hours passed. The younger one stirred first. She blinked slowly, taking in the stone walls, the ceiling beams, the fire. Her eyes were violet. Not metaphorically. Literally, glowing faintly in the dark. Cale crouched beside her. You're safe here. She blinked again, lips barely moving. Are you, a hunter? No. A trapper. He shrugged. Used to be. She glanced toward the older one, still unconscious, then back to him. You're alone. By choice. You don't work for the Red Hands. Cale's brow furrowed. I don't know who that is. She relaxed just a hair. Good. He stood and offered her a mug. Drink this. Stay warm. She accepted it with both hands. Sipped. Blinked fast. What's your name? He asked. Lyra, she said. That's my sister. Vesa. She's hurt. I know. I can clean the wound. But you'll have to tell me what's normal. I don't know your kind. She studied him. Then gave a tiny nod. Cale pulled out his med kit, set up the lamp, and gently peeled back the shoulder wrappings. The tissue beneath shimmered like polished pearl, but the damage was real, deep and ragged. Not a cut. A tear. Maybe a blade. Maybe worse. He worked silently, sterilizing, binding, watching for reaction. Vesa groaned once but didn't wake. She protected me, Lyra said softly. When they took us. When we ran. Cale didn't ask who they were. Not yet. When the wound was wrapped and the fire bank was secure, he gestured toward the bed. It's big enough for both. I'll take the bench. Lyra looked at him for a long moment. Then said, You're not like others. I get that a lot. As she helped Vesa into the bed, Lyra hesitated. You could have turned us in already. Sold us. Or worse. I don't sell people. Most do. Well, Cale said, settling into the bench with a blanket over his lap. Most people haven't been snowed in with me during a blizzard. She gave a tired smile. Lucky us. Outside, the wind roared on. But inside the cabin, something strange had settled. Not fear. Not relief. Something like the space between those things. Uneasy, quiet, but real. And Cale, who hadn't let another soul into his world in nearly 6 years, found himself watching the sisters breathe as sleep claimed them, and wondering, for the first time in a long time, what came next. Morning came late, filtered through layers of storm cloud and fog. Cale awoke to the sound of the hearth being stirred. Lyra was already up, wrapped in a quilt, kneeling before the fire with a kind of reverence, like the flames were more than just heat. Vesa still slept, her breathing even but shallow, bandaged shoulder peeking out from under the blanket. You ever sleep? Cale asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Lyra didn't look at him. Not when I dream. He sat up slowly. Bad ones? No, she said. Old ones. Cale stretched, groaned, and walked to the small kettle he'd left by the coals. Poured 2 cups of hot water and handed her one. She took it without a word. Vesa's fever broke, he said. She'll wake soon. He sipped. You two bonded. Lyra tilted her head. She's my blood. My heart. I meant. I know what you meant, she interrupted softly. We don't bond like humans do. Not first, anyway. Not by accident. He watched her. Then how? She held her cup to her lips, her violet eyes studying him over the rim. We bond by choice. But only after truth. That hung in the air. I know you have questions, she added. Yeah. But I figure you'll answer when you're ready. Her eyes warmed slightly. That's rare. Cale moved to the window, pulling back the frost-blurred curtain. The storm had lessened. Trees bent, but held. Snow deep, but clearing. You're not from any known system, he said. Your body temp, eyes, blood, none of it scans familiar. We're not mapped, she said. Intentionally? Yes. Why? She turned back to the fire. Because the mapped are hunted. He nodded. That, at least, he understood. Later, Vesa stirred. Groaned. Sat up slowly. Careful, Cale said, approaching. Still healing. She looked at him with fierce silver eyes. You touched me. I kept you alive. Lyra stepped beside her, placing a calming hand on her arm. He helped us. Vesa's eyes narrowed, then softened. She sagged back against the pillow. I remember the cold. And then, warmth. Credit the stove, Cale muttered. Vesa managed a small smile. Over the next hours, they regained color. Lyra explored the cabin, touching everything with delicate fascination, his books, the old comm equipment, even the carved eagle skull above the hearth. This is yours? She asked. Cale nodded. Made it when I stopped speaking to people. Why? Because people stopped listening. She held his gaze. We're listening now. They shared a quiet meal. Cale cooked. Vesa asked questions in short, direct bursts. Lyra deflected. But gradually, they opened. We came from a vessel, Lyra said. A traveling node between worlds. Cale raised a brow. Like a mobile shrine. She nodded. A place of learning. Of sacred memory. But something went wrong, he guessed. They boarded us, Vesa said, her voice low. Red hands. Flesh traders. Wanted our marrow, our bondstones. Cale blinked. You're what? Lyra reached beneath her tunic and pulled a pendant from around her neck. It shimmered, deep teal crystal, pulsing faintly. This, she said. Each of us carries one. It holds part of who we are. He leaned closer. Memory. And more. It's beautiful, he said. She smiled. To us, it is sacred. He leaned back. And they wanted to take it. They wanted to weaponize it. Kale swore under his breath. Vesa touched her pendant too, wincing at the pressure. We escaped during transit. They didn't expect us to fight. And now they're tracking you. Lyra nodded. Kale sighed. Then they'll come here. She met his eyes. Would you make us leave? No, he said. But I'd make sure I was ready. She studied him for a long time. Do you know what happens when a bond is freely offered? Kale frowned. I'm guessing it's not just a fancy word for romance. No, she said softly. It's deeper. It's what our kind used to do, when we found someone who truly saw us. Someone we could live for. Or die with. He swallowed. You're saying you'd offer that? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she held out her pendant. I'm saying, she said slowly, you're the first person I've met who didn't want to take something from me. Kale hesitated. Then reached out, gently wrapping his fingers around the stone. It pulsed. And in that moment, just a breath, he felt something more than warmth. He felt seen. Chosen. The fire crackled behind them. Vesa watched silently, her expression unreadable. Outside, wind pulled at the trees. Inside, something far older stirred awake. The ship came 3 days later, quiet, sleek, and wrong. Kale saw it first, a streak of dark iron cutting low over the ridge before vanishing behind the trees. It didn't broadcast. Didn't scan. Just moved like a predator, fast and careful. He stood in the clearing, axe slung over one shoulder, watching the trail of disturbed snowflakes swirl where it had passed. Back inside the cabin, he bolted the door and pulled the emergency lever. Hidden shutters slammed down over the windows with a hiss. The hearth light dimmed to ember glow. Behind him, Lyra and Vesa stood still, calm, too calm. They're here, he said. Vesa nodded. Yes. You knew they'd find you. They always do. Then why stay? Lyra stepped forward. Because this time, we're not running. Kale stared at her, heart thudding. Then we get ready. They worked fast. Vesa, still recovering, mapped their field perimeter, setting soft charges Kale had stored under the floorboards, leftovers from his mining days. Lyra synced the beacon dampeners to scramble thermal scans. Kale handled the long rifle, calibrating its scope across the tree line. By nightfall, the woods were silent. Too silent. And then the knock came. Not a knock, exactly. A rhythmic thud, metal on wood. 3 slow beats. Kale stepped to the door. Lyra moved beside him, stone in hand, glowing faintly. He cracked the panel just enough. A man stood there, clad in matte black armor. No insignia. No badge. Just a scarred face and eyes that never blinked. You have something that doesn't belong to you, he said. Kale didn't answer. Return the cargo. Or we come through you. Lyra spoke from behind the door. We're not cargo. The man tilted his head. Then you're a risk. Kale closed the panel. They'll storm us, Vesa said. Let them try, Kale muttered. And try they did. It started with a concussion pulse. The walls shook. Kale fired through the side hatch, dropping 2 shapes in the snow. Lyra activated a feedback burst from her pendant, sending sonic distortion across the line. Vesa, limping, wielded a plasma arc blade Kale didn't even know he owned until she pulled it from under the bench. They moved like one unit. But the enemy was trained. Coordinated. 10 became 6, became 4, but they kept coming. Kale took a hit to the side, nothing fatal, but it slowed him. He dropped behind the woodpile, bleeding, watching smoke rise from the trees. And then he saw Lyra fall. Not from a wound. From something else. A net. Dampening field. She hit the ground hard, stone slipping from her hand, her body convulsing under a restraint pulse. No. Kale roared, launching himself forward. He collided with one of the soldiers, crushed him to the ground, grabbed the net pack and ripped it off her body. She gasped, eyes wide, pain laced through every muscle. "I'm here," he whispered. "I know." Behind them, another figure approached, the leader. Gun raised. Targeting Kale's chest. Then Vesa appeared, blade in hand, eyes glowing silver. She said one word. A word Kale didn't know, but it hit like thunder. The man paused. Just long enough. Lyra pressed her pendant into Kale's palm. "Now," she whispered. Light exploded around them. Not fire. Not energy. Something deeper. Memory. Will. Kale felt his mind pulled into hers, into both of theirs. A sudden alignment, not of thought, but of choice. He stood, glowing faintly now, the bondstone fused to his palm. He didn't need a weapon. He was the weapon. The soldier hesitated. Just for a breath. Kale moved. And when it was over, snow churned, breath visible in the cold, Kale stood tall, both sisters beside him, and the last of the attackers fled into the trees, wounded and scrambling. Later, inside the cabin, Kale slumped into the hearth chair, blood crusted on his shirt. Lyra knelt beside him. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "I couldn't not. We weren't ready. I didn't care." She leaned in, pressed her forehead to his. "You're part of this now. I know." Vesa sat nearby, silent, watching them both. "We'll be hunted again," she said. Kale nodded. "Then we make this place harder to find." Lyra smiled. "You sound like one of us." He looked at her. "Maybe I am now." The snow stopped falling 2 days later. Sunlight cut through the clouds in narrow beams, illuminating the frost-coated trees like stained glass. The forest looked clean again. Still. But Kale knew better. The silence didn't mean peace, it meant breath held. Inside the cabin, Vesa was adjusting the proximity sensors Kale had buried along the east ridge. Lyra was at the window, tracing the curve of her pendant against the frost-lined glass. Kale sat nearby, watching the quiet unfold between them. "You're healing fast," he said to Vesa. She nodded. "Faster since the bond." Kale rubbed the faint scar in his palm, where the stone had pulsed and left its mark. "Still getting used to that." "It doesn't fade," Vesa said. "But it settles." Lyra turned from the window. "Are you regretting it?" He met her eyes. "Not once." She walked over, sat beside him on the bench. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, she said, "Our bondstones were meant to find resonance. Not just protection. Not just memory. But meaning. And you think I'm your meaning?" "No," she said softly. "I think we chose it. Together." Kale leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've spent a long time trying to be left alone. But now I can't imagine this cabin empty again." Vesa stepped in, holding a data pad with her customary precision. Intercepted signal from a scout vessel. 3 days out. Different faction. Not red hands. But they'll be looking. Kale stood. "What do they want?" "Unclear," Vesa replied. "But they're following the same energy trail the others were." "The stone?" No, Lyra said. The bond. Kale frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does, Vesa said. Our kind didn't just carry memories. We carried keys. To technology. To language. To systems no longer used. Lyra reached into her cloak and pulled out the pendant again. It shimmered, reacting to his presence. It's not just sacred, she whispered. It's a map. Kale inhaled sharply. To what? We don't know, Lyra admitted. Only that the ones who do, want to control it. He looked between them. So what do we do? Vesa's gaze sharpened. We prepare. And we ask you to decide. Decide what? If you want this life, Lyra said. Not just survival. But us. Kale didn't blink. You already know the answer. That night, the three of them sat by the fire. Not as fugitives. Not as strangers. As something more. Vesa cleaned the blade she'd used in the fight. Kale refitted the rifle scope. Lyra read through Kale's oldest books, marveling at the faded ink and cracked spines. At some point, Kale stood and walked to the center of the room. He turned to face them. I never thought I'd say this, he began, but I don't want to go back to being alone. Even if this gets worse. Even if they come again. Lyra stood too, slowly. We didn't bond you because we needed help, she said. We bonded you because you saw us. Vesa joined them. And you didn't run. They approached him, one on each side. Their hands rested on his chest and shoulder. Warm. Steady. Lyra pressed her forehead to his. Do you accept it now? Not just the bond. But us. He nodded. Then we share what's ours, Vesa said. Together, they removed their pendants and touched them to his palm again. This time, there was no pain. Just warmth. The stones merged, fusing with the faint light already inside him. A soft glow lit his skin. Not overwhelming. Just enough. Enough to mark that something had changed forever. Later that night, after the fire burned low, Lyra curled beside Kale on the cot. Vesa stood watch by the window, cloak draped like mist across her shoulders. You're different now, Lyra said into his chest. So are you. I feel, she hesitated. Lighter. He smiled. That's what trust feels like. Her hand found his. I don't want to lose this. You won't, he said. Not while I'm breathing. And somewhere in the woods, beneath moonlight fractured by frost-laced branches, a shadow listened. Watched. Then turned away. Because even those trained to hunt knew what it meant to see a bond sealed by choice. They would come again. But they would not come easily. The attack came just after first light. Not with warning shots or shouts, but with precision. A plasma round tore through the treetop just above the cabin, sending splinters across the clearing. Kale was already in motion, throwing open the weapons locker, yanking Vesa down from the window as a second shot sizzled past her ear. They're not syndicate, Vesa said calmly, crouched low. They're hunters. Great, Kale muttered. The polite kind. Lyra emerged from the hallway in full stride, stone glowing bright. They're here for the convergence. The what? But she didn't answer. Her eyes locked on the wall, the one Kale had reinforced with ferro steel months ago. Not for this, but for storms. He wondered if it would hold. Outside perimeter? Kale asked. Breached in 3 points, Vesa said. I've got countercharges set, but they'll only delay. Then we hold the inside. He moved to the hatch, shouldering his rifle. If they want what we have, they'll need to bleed for it. Lyra touched his arm. You don't have to protect us alone. I'm not, he said. I'm protecting all of us. He cracked the side hatch and fired twice. One armored figure dropped, twitching in the snow. A second moved fast, but not fast enough. Vessa's blade met them with a hiss of white-hot energy. Kale turned in time to see Lyra standing in the doorway, palms raised, pendant pulsing like a heartbeat. Energy shimmered around her, warping the air. She whispered a word not meant for human ears. And the snow exploded outward in a shockwave of sound and light. The attackers reeled. Kale caught one with a hammer strike to the chest plate, knocking him flat. Another lunged, but Lyra caught his head in both hands and pulsed energy into his mind. He went still. Not dead, just quiet. Inside the cabin, the roof began to tremble. "The stones are sinking," Vessa said, breath ragged. "All three. They're drawing something in." "What kind of something?" Kale shouted. But he already knew. A pulse surged through the earth beneath them, lighting up the clearing in blue veins. The cabin became the eye of a storm, quiet, glowing, humming with a power older than the stars. And then, silence. The remaining attackers froze. And from the tree lean, a new figure stepped forward. Not armored. Not armed. Cloaked in silver thread. Eyes like mercury. Kale raised his rifle. "No," Lyra said softly. "She's not one of them." The woman stepped closer, calm, reverent. She bowed her head. "I am Tira. Keeper of the Hidden Way." Kale lowered the rifle an inch. "You're late to the party." "I came to witness the awakening," Tira said. "And to warn you. That bond you formed, it is no longer just yours." Vessa's eyes narrowed. "Then whose is it?" Tira looked at Kale. "It belongs to history now. And to those who will come searching." Kale frowned. "So they'll keep hunting." "Yes. But not to destroy. To control." Lyra stepped forward. "We won't let them." "No," Tira said. "You will choose something greater. Sanctuary." She pointed to the horizon. Beyond the ridge, a glow was rising, not sun. Something else. A distant beacon pulsing in the clouds. "A haven?" Lyra asked. Tira nodded. "For those like you. Hidden. Waiting. Needing a place to begin again." Kale looked at the wrecked clearing, the scorched snow, the faint scars across his hands. Then at Lyra. And Vessa. And something inside him said, "Yes. We'll go," he said. "But together." Tira smiled. Later, as the forest quieted, Kale sat with Lyra beneath the broken beam of the cabin's porch. Snow fell again, soft this time. Almost gentle. "You really want to leave all this behind?" she asked. He looked at the ruin, the ash, the silence. "Yes," he said. "If it means keeping you." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Then we'll build something new." In the morning, they would head north. Toward the haven. Toward the unknown. But for now, they stayed in the ruin of the place where their bond was born. And watched the snow cover the scars. They say the stars don't care who you are. That they burn the same whether you're hunted, chosen, lost, or found. But maybe that's not true. Maybe they notice when something rare happens, when someone gives instead of takes, when survival becomes sanctuary, and when three souls choose each other not out of need, but out of belief. Kale Roran didn't ask for this. He built a life to be forgotten. A cabin no one would find. A heart no one could touch. But then came Lyra and Vessa, carrying bondstones and broken pasts. And instead of running, he stayed. He listened. And he fought. What they built in that forest wasn't perfect. It didn't erase pain or stop the stars from spinning. But it was real. And that mattered more than peace. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you that love can be fierce, chosen, and sometimes terrifying, do us a favor. Like the video. Subscribe for more grounded sci-fi with soul. Share this with someone who'd fight beside you, even at the edge of the galaxy. Because the quiet ones, the ones who stay when it's hardest, they're the ones who change everything.